There is one decade of your life that will make or break the amount of wealth that you'll actually end up building. And most people just sail right past it. They don't even notice it when it's happening. And by the time that they look back and realize what they had, the window has already closed. So today, I'm going to tell you exactly what that decade is, why it's so powerful, and why almost everybody I speak to massively underrates it. Let's get into it. Okay, so we've all seen those compound growth charts, right? You know the ones. Exactly like is on the screen now. Somebody invests a tiny amount of money in their 20s and the line bends gently upwards and 40 years later it's worth a small fortune. The lesson is always the same, right? Start early, let compounding do the heavy lifting, and time will make you rich. And look, that's not wrong exactly. Compound growth genuinely is one of the most powerful forces in finance. Every financial plan that I've ever seen or has ever been written starts with the same assumption. Start early, let compounding run, and time does all the heavy lifting. It's the foundation of my whole industry, essentially. But here's what I've learned after years of sitting across from real people at my desk, looking at their actual finances rather than just some tidy illustration on a slide. It almost never plays out the way that this chart promises. Because those compound growth charts make a quiet but massive assumption. It assumes that you put the money in early and then it just stays there, untouched, compounding peacefully for 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. No interruptions, no emergency, no life. And that is just not how life works in the real world. It's not how human beings work, in my experience. Look, if you're in your 30s or your 40s and you're watching this right now and you feel like you haven't been saving and investing seriously since your 20s, you've probably already been told a version of this same story. I've left it too late. I've missed the window. The compound growth charts just don't look as attractive for me anymore, or just don't work in the first place. I'm past it. I can't do anything about it. But here's the part that drives me crazy, and it's the part that most people get completely backwards. When you actually look and deal with people every single day about how wealth gets actually built in the real world, you find something completely different than all these people are telling you. Look, obviously time matters. Obviously it does. But the thing that genuinely moves the needle, it's the thing that I see time and time again in my one-to-one sessions and with my clients, the lever that separates the people who build real wealth from people who don't, is the size of the contributions that they make. Think about it this way, right? Compounding is the engine, right? Compounding is what makes the engine move. But contributions are the fuel to that engine. An incredible engine with an empty tank doesn't take you anywhere. It's a bit like having, I don't know, a Ferrari, but not being able to afford to put petrol in it. It's completely redundant. £100 a month compounding for 40 years looks great on a chart. But what about £1,000 a month compounding for 20 years? That often ends up miles ahead, obviously, right? Because the fuel that you're feeding into the fire is so much bigger. So the real question isn't just, how do I start as early as I can and what can I do? And I should have been invested in my 20s. It's actually, when in my life do I actually have both things that I need? Enough time left for compounding to do the work and enough spare money to make the contributions genuinely meaningful and genuinely matter. Hold that question in your mind, because the answer is the whole point of this video, to be honest with you. To find that kind of sweet spot, right? That Venn diagram where you have enough contributions and enough time to make this whole thing work. So let's actually walk through it very quickly, decade by decade, so you can see what I mean. Your 20s, okay? In your 20s, you are rich in just one thing. And it's the one thing that these compound interest charts love: time. you've got something like 40 years until retirement, right? Compounding has decades to work its magic. Here's just one problem with it though. You usually almost have nothing to contribute. You're early in your career, right? You're earning the least you'll probably ever earn. You might be paying off things like student debt, scraping together money for a deposit for a house or rent. You're just figuring out life. It's messy, right? The intention is always there, but the cash flow is not. So you've got the time, you just don't have the fuel. In your 30s, now look, your income is starting to climb slightly. That's good news. But here's the catch. Your costs are starting to explode alongside it. Trust me, I'm in my 30s. This has happened to me, okay? And it's often a lot faster than you think. So this tends to be the decade of like big commitments, right? Maybe a new, fresh, big mortgage on a family home. Maybe young children. You know, I've got a young daughter. The costs that come along with that have, exponentially exploded. All the things that come along with that, you know, childcare, which can cost as much as a second mortgage. You have to get a bigger car. Trust me, the bigger everything you need with things like that. You're earning more than ever before, way more than your 20s, sure. But you haven't hit your peak earnings yet. You're not, earning the maximum. And almost every extra pound that comes in seems to already kind of have to go somewhere else. You want to invest more. You just can't really find the capacity and the room. So in your 30s, you've still got a decent time horizon on your side, but the fuel keeps getting siphoned off before it ever reaches the tank. It might be sporadic, it might be, time to time, or less than what it might be in other years. Every year, it's important to point this out, every year that passes in your 30s and you're unable to make meaningful contributions, not through lack of discipline, but because the structure of your costs and how you run your life swallows everything, that is a delay tax, right? And it's not a failure. It's just a structural trap that almost everyone walks straight into. And it's exactly why the next decade, your 40s, matters so much. Here's why. This is where everything quietly changes. By the time that you hit your 40s, a handful of things start to sort of line up at the same time. And that combination is genuinely the magic. It's genuinely rare, right? So first, you're kind of a bit more settled in your life, in your career, and just generally who you are as a human being. Secondly, you're often moving into your more peak earning years. Third, and this is the big one, some of those massive costs with a young new family often start to ease off, or at least kind of reach a plateau and stop climbing exponentially. The children are past that eye-watering early years childcare cost stage. You're chipping away at that mortgage for a little bit longer, so you've paid off some equity in that, and a fewer kind of enormous big costs land out of nowhere because your life's a bit more predictable. So look at what you now have all at once. You've got somewhere in the region of 20 years until retirement, which is plenty of time for compounding to do serious work. And maybe for the first time in your whole adult life, you've got the ammunition, real money left over at the end of the month. You can actually put to work and make work as hard for you as you did for it. That overlap, enough time and enough money together at the same moment is the rarest, most powerful combination in your whole financial life. This is the magic sauce right here, and you've got to take advantage of it. And for most people, that combination, that magic blend, lives in the decade between age 40 and 50. That's the decade that almost everybody sleeps on. Honestly, I think it's the single most powerful wealth building decade that there is. And hardly anyone treats it that way, right? There's this binary thing of like, you must start early. So if you're in this decade right now, or you're heading towards it at a rapid rate, like I feel like I am, what do you actually do about it? How can you take advantage of this in the best way? So first up, I'm not going to give you some magic number or strategy or anything else like that, because everyone's situation is different. And of course, nothing here is sort of personal financial advice. But there are three key things, three sort of moves that I really want you to get focused on. And these are the ones that, if you get these right, these are the things that really move the needle and give this decade the best possible chance to basically just do its job. The first thing is what I call the fuel principle. Protect your income supply. Remember, look, the whole idea here is that your income is the ammunition, it's the fuel for the fire. You might have more left over at the end of each month than before, but all of that depends on one very fragile truth, doesn't it? That income keeps coming in. Here is the uncomfortable truth. In your 40s, that's exactly when a sudden stop in that flow of that ammunition and that fuel would hurt the absolute most. If you lose a job or illness takes you out of action, you've got a big mortgage, people depending on you, and you're in this critical wealth building decade. That's when everything can truly come undone. I've seen it loads of times before. The fuel stops, the bills don't, and time doesn't. So really, really important to protect that. So before you go all in on contributions and racking up your wealth, build something like a safety net underneath them. Generally speaking, you'd want to have around 3 to 6 months worth of expenses set aside. So a bump in the road doesn't force you to tear down everything that you've already built. And if you've got, a lot of dependents, a lot of large debts, and you're very leveraged up, I honestly, seriously want you to consider income protection. This is just an insurance policy that you pay monthly for that would pay around roughly 60% of your income if you're unable to work through illness or injury. Look, it's not glamorous, it's not sexy, and bizarrely, in a weird twist of fate, it's money every month that you're spending that you actually hope that you're wasting, because obviously you wouldn't have had to have claimed at that point. But it is something that keeps you from a temporary setback turning into like a permanent one. You can't build wealth on a fuel supply that might vanish overnight. Protect the fuel first. Massively underrated. Make sure you do this. Second up, what I call contribution velocity. You've got to maximize the gap, okay? The single most useful number you can track any time in your life, but particularly in this decade, it is not your salary, right? It's not that headline gross figure that you're sort of like, oh, I get paid this much, Doesn't matter. What does matter is what I call your contribution velocity, or your wealth building velocity. I've called it in other videos. That is the gap between your monthly burn rate, meaning how much you're actually spending every single month, and how much you've got coming in. That gap between those two numbers is the whole game. It's the fuel that's genuinely available to throw on that fire. The best metric that will indicate whether you're actually going to convert your income into lasting wealth is this velocity number. So vitally important. And the reason that I love tracking it instead of just gross income figures or whatever else is it tells a really brutal, obvious truth instantly. If your contribution velocity is widening, you're winning, aren't you? More of your rising income is being converted into real wealth. But if it starts shrinking, even while you're maybe earning a little bit more, that's other factors. That's lifestyle inflation creeping in, quietly eating the exact surplus that this decade is supposed to be built on. You can't manage what you can't measure, what you don't measure, okay? Watch the gap, forget your gross income, watch this gap. The third thing is what I call wealth architecture, right? Track the actual real destination of where you want to be. This is, I would say, the biggest mindset shift. Most people are so fixated on growing their income, right? Getting the next pay rise, the bigger number on the pay slip. But on their own, they're just vanity metrics mainly. A bigger income that gets spent on everything leaves you no wealthier than before. It's just a pipe that has more water flowing through it. So what I want you to try and do is start tracking your net worth instead. Again, very, very simple. What you own, so your savings, investments, your pension, your equity, and your property, versus what you owe, right? Your mortgage, your unsecured debts, etc. Things like that. The single number that tells you, along with your wealth velocity, is the number one predictor of long-term future wealth. I work it out with all of my clients in our one-to-one sessions, and with the clients that I've been working with for high-end financial planning for a long time. These are a long way, these are the things that are going to move that needle. It's like a doctor saying to you, stop smoking. It's the biggest indicator in mortality. These figures are the biggest indicator in how well you'll do with building wealth. And one more important nuance here. As you build that net worth, I would say try to prioritize the more liquid kinds of wealth, right? So savings, investments, and pensions to a certain degree, over things like property that you can't easily tap into to generate an income later. A big house that you live in can't pay your bills, right? It can't pay your bills in retirement. Wealth you can access and actually turn an income from does. Look, I'm not saying things like overpaying your mortgage is necessarily a bad thing. Of course it's not. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. Just get the balance right. I would just try to potentially tilt and steer more towards having a bias towards that liquid wealth aspect. Of course, you could argue that things in retirement funds and investments aren't particularly liquid. I get that, but they're certainly more accessible than equity locked away in your property. You could be sitting in a £10 million house mortgage free. That's great. But if you've got £2.50 in your bank, it's kind of irrelevant, right? One of the biggest impacts I've seen on, I would say, honestly, all of this is understanding how your income and your gross salary, if you're not careful, can create an absolute trap. That's why I really think you should watch this video here next, because in the strange world that we currently live in, there is a point at which it makes little sense to actually take a pay rise. Madness. But the good thing is we can do something about it. So give it a click and I will see you there.